My mother-in-law slapped me at my 5th wedding anniversary dinner for serving myself first. "You've forgotten your place in this family," she sneered as my husband stared quietly at his plate. I slowly set my fork down, delivered a crisp slap back across her face, and stood up. That single strike marked the exact moment I dismantled their multi-million-dollar empire. My name is Hazel Clark. To understand how a public altercation at an elite waterfront restaurant in Savannah, Georgia, triggered the total collapse of a prominent real estate family and exposed millions of dollars in corporate bank fraud, you have to look into the arrogant world of the Prescott family. For 5 years, my mother-in-law, Victoria Prescott, and my husband, Garrett Prescott, treated me as an unsophisticated outsider whom they had generously rescued from financial obscurity. The Prescotts operated Prescott Heritage Hospitality Group, a boutique firm managing historic inns and luxury event spaces across coastal Georgia. Victoria was a status-obsessed matriarch who evaluated human dignity strictly through social registry listings and vintage jewelry, spending her days hosting charity galas and demanding absolute obedience from everyone in her domestic circle. Her son, Garrett, was a spineless man who relied entirely on his mother's social influence, lacking basic financial discipline and leaning heavily on municipal restoration grants to keep his failing ventures operational. When Garrett and I met 6 years ago, I was working quietly as a senior structural auditor for a regional civil engineering firm. I lived simply, drove a modest 4-door sedan, and dressed in practical attire. What Victoria and Garrett did not know was that my unassuming lifestyle was a deliberate personal choice, not a sign of financial dependency. I am the sole heiress and managing principal trustee of Clark Infrastructure Trust, a $400 million commercial asset, port logistics, and civil development enterprise established by my late grandfather, Harrison Clark. The trust controlled Atlantic coast shipping terminals, commercial plazas, and substantial equity stakes in regional banking institutions. I chose to keep my family's vast wealth private when I married Garrett, wanting a marriage built on authentic respect rather than financial opportunism. However, within 6 months of our wedding ceremony, Victoria's true nature asserted itself with relentless cruelty. She made it her daily mission to belittle my background, making passive-aggressive comments about my wardrobe, referring to my family as nobodies from the countryside, and excluding me from business discussions. Whenever Victoria hosted dinner parties at her historic mansion, she treated me as an unpaid domestic servant, ordering me to pour wine for her socialite friends and clear dirty dishes while she boasted about her lineage. Garrett never defended me. Instead of standing up to his mother's psychological abuse, he actively reinforced it. Whenever we returned home from a family gathering, Garrett would scold me for not acting submissive enough, reminding me in every opportunity that I was fortunate a man of his elevated social standing had lowered his personal standards to marry me. What Victoria and Garrett concealed beneath their arrogant public image was a terrifying financial reality. Prescott Heritage Hospitality Group was secretly drowning in debt. Victoria's extravagant lifestyle, 5-figure designer wardrobe bills, and lavish galas, combined with Garrett's catastrophic commercial investments, had completely drained the firm's liquidity reserves. They were surviving on borrowed credit lines and delayed vendor payments, using me as a convenient emotional punching bag to vent their internal panic. The toxic dynamic reached its absolute breaking point last Friday evening, the night of our 5th wedding anniversary. I had made dinner reservations months in advance for just Garrett and me at the Riverfront Bistro, an exclusive establishment on Factor's Walk. However, when I arrived, I was appalled to find that Garrett had invited Victoria, along with 4 of her high society acquaintances, Priscilla Montgomery, Eleanor Vance, and 2 local hotel investors. Throughout the first 2 hours of the meal, Victoria dominated the table, loudly boasting about her social connections, while directing a constant stream of humiliating remarks at me. She chuckled with her friends as she framed my presence as a charitable deed, mocking my simple attire and claiming Garrett had married beneath himself out of pity. I sat quietly, taking slow breaths, enduring the psychological barrage for the sake of public decorum. I had worked a grueling 12-hour shift inspecting structural bridges under a humid Georgia sun and had eaten nothing all day. My head was throbbing and I was physically exhausted. When the main course arrived, the server placed a large silver platter of roasted tenderloin and artisanal vegetables in the center of the table for family-style service. Hoping to quietly eat and maintain my composure, I picked up the silver serving fork and served a modest portion onto my own dinner plate. The reaction at the table was immediate and suffocatingly tense. Victoria dropped her wine glass onto the tablecloth, her face twisting into an expression of pure venom. "Hazel," Victoria snapped loudly, her voice piercing through the restaurant and drawing the attention of surrounding diners. "A common, uncouth woman of your background clearly lacks basic manners. In the Prescott family, you serve the matriarch first, then your husband, then our guests, and yourself last. How dare you reach across this cable before your betters?" I looked at Victoria calmly, setting my cloth napkin in my lap, keeping my tone measured. "Victoria, this is my 5th wedding anniversary dinner, and I have worked a 12-hour day. We are all grown adults, and I served myself a simple portion of food. There is no need for this scene." Enraged that a woman she viewed as an inferior had dared to answer back, Victoria stood up, reached across the candlelit table, and delivered a hard, stinging slap directly across my left cheek. The crack of her hand against my skin echoed through the quiet restaurant. My head snapped to the side, and a burning heat radiated across my face. A collective gasp rippled across nearby tables as the entire dining room fell dead silent. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't clutch my cheek. I slowly turned my head and looked directly at my husband, Garrett, expecting that after 5 years of marriage, he would finally show a shred of courage, stand up to his mother, and defend his wife against a violent public assault. Instead, Garrett shrank back into his seat like a coward. He stared down at his water glass, cleared his throat awkwardly, and mumbled in a low voice, "Just apologize to my mother, Hazel. You embarrassed her in front of her friends. You know how important traditional etiquette is to this family." That was the exact second 5 years of patience evaporated, replaced by an ice-cold, crystal-clear resolve. I slowly set my silver dinner fork down on the tablecloth. I stood up from my chair, adjusted my coat, and walked slowly around the long table until I was standing directly in front of Victoria Prescott. Before Victoria could utter another word, I drew back my right arm and delivered a swift, powerful, resounding slap right back across her face. The impact was absolute. The force of the strike knocked Victoria backward, sending her body slamming into her upholstered chair, knocking over her glass of Cabernet, and sending her diamond earring flying across the floor. Victoria clutched her red cheek, gasping frantically in shock. You hit me? Garrett, she struck me." I leaned down, brought my face inches from Victoria's trembling jaw, and whispered in a razor-sharp tone, "And you just lost everything you thought you owned, Victoria. Every single thing." I grabbed my handbag, turned on my heel, and walked out of the riverfront bistro into the cool Georgia night, leaving a room full of stunned aristocrats behind me. The moment I reached my vehicle, the emotional weight vanished, replaced by an operational focus. I called my family trust's senior managing counsel, Dominic Hayes, a brilliant, relentless corporate litigation attorney who had managed Clark Infrastructure Trust for over 15 years. "Hazel?" Dominic answered, recognizing the intensity in my voice. "Is everything all right?" "Dominic, I am ending my marriage tonight," I stated with absolute clarity, And I want a full, aggressive forensic audit launched into Prescott Heritage Hospitality Group, Garrett Prescott, and Victoria Prescott. Pull every deed, every commercial lease, every loan document, and every municipal grant associated with their names in Georgia. I want to know every dollar they owe, and I want it on my desk by Monday morning. Consider it done, Dominic replied without hesitation. Over the next 48 hours, while Garrett sent me dozens of furious text messages demanding that I return home, apologize to his mother, and pay for Victoria's emotional distress, Dominic Hayes and an elite team of forensic accountants worked around the clock inside the high-security offices of Clark Infrastructure Trust. What they uncovered during that weekend audit was a goldmine of financial delinquency, corporate fraud, and breathtaking hubris. First, the historic commercial flagship hotel on Bull Street, where Prescott Heritage Hospitality Group operated its primary business, was not owned by the Prescott family. It was held by a commercial holding entity called Savannah Historic Properties, LLC. 2 years prior, Clark Infrastructure Trust had quietly purchased that exact holding entity as part of our real estate portfolio expansion. Prescott Hospitality was currently 6 months behind on their commercial lease payments, owing over $260,000 in back rent and default penalties. Second, Victoria Prescott's prized personal residence, the Oglethorpe Estate, a sprawling historic mansion in Savannah, valued at $7 million, was held under a defaulted private mortgage note. 3 months prior, Dominic Hayes had quietly purchased that mortgage note on behalf of Clark Infrastructure Trust. Victoria was currently 94 days delinquent, placing the estate in complete immediate foreclosure default. Third, Dominic's forensic team discovered that 5 months ago, Garrett Prescott had committed major felony forgery. To secure a $5.2 million high-interest corporate loan from Atlantic Commerce Bank to cover his firm's payroll and fund Victoria's extravagant lifestyle, Garrett had forged my signature on a spousal asset guarantee, falsely pledging my private inherited trust distributions as collateral. Finally, the audit revealed that Garrett and Victoria had embezzled over $900,000 in municipal restoration grants from the Georgia Historical Society, depositing public funds directly into Victoria's personal bank accounts to pay for her galas and designer clothes. "We have them completely trapped, Hazel," Dominic Hayes told me on Monday morning, placing a binder of court filings on my desk. "We hold their commercial lease, we hold the mortgage on Victoria's estate, we have proof of bank forgery, and we have the grant embezzlement records. How do you want to proceed?" Victoria is hosting her annual Savannah Heritage Preservation Gala at the Oglethorpe Estate tomorrow night, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. She invited the entire city elite to prove her social dominance. That is where we close the curtain. The following evening, the Oglethorpe Estate was bathed in golden exterior lighting. Classical musicians played near the marble fountain as over 150 of Savannah's wealthiest citizens, media reporters, and civic leaders gathered on the grand portico sipping champagne. Victoria Prescott stood near the grand entrance wearing a glittering sapphire silk gown, holding court with prominent politicians. Her face still bore a faint, carefully concealed bruise under heavy foundation, but her demeanor was as arrogant as ever. Garrett stood beside her in a tailored tuxedo, trying to network with investors to secure new capital for his failing firm. At precisely 8:30, as Victoria stepped up to a brass microphone on the grand porch to deliver her keynote speech on class and social leadership, the heavy iron gates at the entrance of the estate swung open. A motorcade of 3 vehicles, a black luxury sedan flanked by 2 marked Georgia Bureau of Investigation (GBI) cruisers, and a Chatham County Sheriff vehicle pulled smoothly up the gravel driveway. The music stopped. The chatter died down. 150 guests turned in absolute silence to watch the scene unfold. The door of the black sedan opened, and I stepped out. I was wearing an exquisite floor-length dark emerald gown, my grandfather's vintage diamond necklace sparkling under the terrace lights. Walking beside me was Dominic Hayes, accompanied by 2 senior financial fraud investigators and 4 uniformed sheriff deputies. Victoria's face went dead white. "Hazel?" she gasped into the microphone. "What is the meaning of this intrusion? Security, remove this woman from my property immediately." Dominic Hayes stepped forward with a public address microphone, his voice booming across the estate. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dominic Hayes, Senior Managing Trustee Counsel for Clark Infrastructure Trust." Gasps erupted across the crowd as prominent business leaders recognized the name. Dominic turned toward Victoria and Garrett. "First," Dominic declared, "as of 5 o'clock this afternoon, Clark Infrastructure Trust officially executed a final judicial foreclosure decree on the Oglethorpe estate, due to 94 days of mortgage default. Victoria Prescott no longer owns this property. The owner of this estate is sitting right here, my client, Hazel Clark." Victoria let out a horrified shriek, clutching her chest as her champagne glass shattered on the stone steps. "No, that's a lie! You can't foreclose on me!" "Second," Dominic continued with ice-cold precision, "regarding Prescott Heritage Hospitality Group, Clark Infrastructure Trust has formally terminated your commercial lease at the Bull Street Hotel headquarters due to unpaid rent. The premises have been locked and sealed by court order." Garrett stumbled forward, his face drained of color as he looked at me in sheer terror. "Hazel, please, what are you doing? We're married. You can't do this to my business." "We were married, Garrett, until you stood by and let your mother assault me, and until you forged my name to steal millions from my family trust." The lead GBI investigator stepped onto the porch and pulled out a formal arrest warrant. "Garrett Prescott, you are under arrest for felony wire fraud, grand identity theft, bank forgery, and municipal grant embezzlement." The steel handcuffs clicked loudly over Garrett's wrists in full view of every high society guest and news reporter in Savannah. Garrett broke down into hysterical sobs, dropping to his knees as officers led him toward the police cruiser. A sheriff deputy stepped up to Victoria, handing her a formal 30-minute emergency eviction notice. "Mrs. Prescott, this property is now under the legal possession of Clark Infrastructure Trust. You have 30 minutes to gather your personal clothing and step off the premises before you are arrested for criminal trespassing." Victoria collapsed onto the stone steps, weeping frantically, ruined and exposed in front of the very society she had spent her life trying to impress. Her wealthy friends quickly turned their backs, walking rapidly toward the exit gates. Faced with overwhelming forensic banking evidence, Garrett Prescott pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud, bank forgery, and grant embezzlement. He was sentenced to 8 years in a federal correctional facility and ordered to pay over $4 million in restitution. Prescott Heritage Hospitality Group declared total corporate bankruptcy, and its physical assets were liquidated at public auction. Victoria Prescott was stripped of her home, fortune, and social standing, moving into a small rented one-bedroom apartment in a rural county on a minimal fixed pension. I obtained an immediate, full annulment on the grounds of fraud. Rather than selling the Oglethorpe estate, I used funds from Clark Infrastructure Trust to transform the historic mansion into the Clark Civil Preservation and Education Center, a public, nonprofit institution supporting local restoration tradespeople and providing scholarships for young female civil engineers. 2 years later, sitting on the sunlit balcony of the Oglethorpe estate, watching the golden sunset reflect off the calm river, I know with absolute certainty that true nobility isn't inherited through social status. It is built through unshakable self-worth, quiet integrity, and the courage to let the truth prevail. educational lesson. This narrative demonstrates key legal principles regarding commercial property foreclosures, spousal forgery protections, and the mechanics of private asset trusts. Abusive or domineering family members often project an image of unassailable dominance to hide severe underlying vulnerabilities. In corporate law and real estate governance, private asset trusts possess immense structural leverage through debt acquisition, leasehold enforcement, and judicial foreclosures. When individuals engage in financial fraud, such as forging spousal guarantees or embezzling municipal grants, they transition from domestic conflicts to federal criminal liabilities. Maintaining strict documentation and utilizing formal legal frameworks is the most effective method for dismantling systemic exploitation. Personal advice. If you are trapped in a toxic relationship or family dynamic where you are subjected to public humiliation, physical hostility, or financial degradation, do not waste your time arguing or pleading for basic human respect. Keep your financial assets and professional achievements secure. Document every instance of abuse or illegal conduct, and seek guidance from qualified legal professionals behind the scenes. When you refuse to play the role of a victim and enforce your personal boundaries through uncompromising legal and financial truths, you reclaim your power and allow justice to naturally hold your abusers accountable.